Look, we need to start today's deep dive with full transparency.
Oh, absolutely.
Because usually when you, the listener, send us materials to analyze, we are staring down the barrel of, like, a 50-page academic journal or maybe a really dense stack of economic data sets.
Right, or some massive multi-chapter manifesto.
Yeah. We prepare the coffee, we highlight furiously, we build out these massive flowcharts. But today you sent us exactly 10 words.
10 words. And I mean, to be entirely fair, one of them features a pretty noticeable typo.
It really does. So the entire source text we are analyzing today is a single, completely isolated sentence from a piece titled The Mastery Path. And here is the quote in its absolute entirety. "The advantage to learn English from level A1 to C2. That's it. That is what we're working with today."
Yeah, it's incredibly blunt. It's almost like a search engine query that just accidentally got published as a thesis statement.
Exactly. When I first saw it, I just laughed. I thought, well, this is going to be the shortest deep dive in history.
Yeah.
We could all go home early.
But it's not, is it?
No. Because then I actually started thinking about the underlying premise tucked into those 10 little words. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this incredibly brief, slightly misspelled prompt is actually pointing to one of the most complex, fascinating neurological journeys a human being can undertake.
Because it isn't just asking about taking a few conversational classes or downloading an app. It is explicitly mapping out the absolute totality of language acquisition.
Right.
It's drawing a line from the absolute zero of A1 to the near native pinnacle of C2, and it's asking, basically, what is the fundamental advantage of surviving that entire spectrum?
And that is exactly our mission today. We're not going to pretend this prompt is some ancient mystical proverb.
Yeah.
But we are going to take the spirit of what it's asking, and we're going to break down the actual scientific mechanics of what it means to travel that path.
Yeah, the real mechanics of it.
Right. We're going to explore how your brain physically changes when you go from A1 to C2 and what that ultimate quote-unquote advantage actually looks like in the real world.
Which I think is a brilliant way to approach it. Because buried right there in this short prompt is a very specific philosophical framing. Before we even touch on the A1 to C2 scale, we really have to look at the title of the work this comes from. The Mastery Path.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because framing it as a mastery path honestly sounds exhausting.
It does sound like a lot of work.
Like if I tell someone I'm learning to bake sourdough, that sounds like a fun weekend project. If I tell them I'm embarking on the sourdough mastery path, I sound like a fanatic who is about to spend thousands of dollars on specialized flour, right?
And temperature-controlled proofing boxes, yeah,
Exactly. Doesn't framing language learning as this massive, epic path to mastery actually risk demotivating people right out of the gate?
That's a really valid concern, and it's actually a known trap in educational psychology.
Huh.
If you are an absolute beginner, staring at a 10-year roadmap to mastery can absolutely induce paralysis.
Yeah, I just freeze up.
Right, you might look at the sheer volume of grammar rules, the vocabulary, the phonetic nuances, and just think, I am never going to reach the end of this, so why even start?
You just quit on day 2 because you can't roll your R's yet.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is that the concept of a defined path actually acts as a psychological safeguard. That is, provided you understand the mechanics of deliberate practice.
Okay, wait, how so?
Well, when you just vaguely learn language, say, by clicking around on a flashy app for 5 minutes while waiting for a bus, you are engaging in passive exposure. It feels easy, but the retention is incredibly low. A mastery path implies structure.
Right.
It means you aren't just wandering through a forest hoping to absorb English by osmosis. You have a curriculum, you have feedback loops, and you have distinct stages.
So it's kind of the difference between just mashing buttons on a controller hoping your character does something cool versus actually pulling up the tutorial menu and learning the underlying physics of the game.
That is a perfect analogy. When you are just button mashing, you might accidentally pull off a great combo, or in this case, perfectly order a coffee in English.
Yeah, you get lucky once.
But you don't know how you did it.
Yeah.
And you can't replicate it in a different context. A mastery path is about learning the underlying codes so you can eventually manipulate the environment yourself.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, which brings us perfectly to the core mechanism of the prompt. Because the text doesn't just say, learn English. It explicitly brackets the journey from level A1 to C2.
Yes.
And for those who might not be familiar with that specific alphabet soup, we are talking about the CEFR scale, right? the
Yeah.
common European framework of reference for languages.
Correct. It's the international gold standard for measuring language proficiency. It basically divides learners into three broad divisions, which are then split into two levels each.
So 6 levels total.
Right. You have A1 and A2 for basic users,
Wow.
B1 and B2 for independent users, and then C1 and C2 for proficient users.
Okay, so let's actually unpack the mechanics of this, because I think a lot of people just assume learning a language is this linear progression of just memorizing more and more words.
Just adding flashcards.
Right, exactly. But the shift from A1 to C2 isn't just about volume, is it? It's a fundamental change in how the brain operates. Let's start at the very bottom. What is actually happening in your brain at A1?
At A1, you are entirely reliant on what cognitive scientists call declarative memory. This is the part of your brain that consciously recalls facts.
Like trivia.
Yes, exactly. At this stage, everything is a mathematical equation. You hear the word apple, your brain actively searches your memory bank, finds the translation in your native language, and then processes the concept.
Which is incredibly slow.
It is exhausting. Your cognitive load is just completely maxed out trying to say, where is the bathroom? You are manually building every single sentence block by block.
I remember taking an introductory language class, and after like a 30-minute conversation practice, I felt like I needed a nap. It literally felt like my brain was overheating.
That's because you were basically running an emulator in your brain.
Oh, wow.
Think of it like trying to run heavy Mac software on an old Windows PC using a translation program. It works, but the fan is spinning incredibly loud and everything is lagging. That is A1 and A2. You are surviving, but there is immense friction.
Okay, so if A1 and A2 are the emulator phase, what happens when we move up the path to the B levels? Because B2 is generally considered fluent by most casual standards, right?
Yeah.
That's the level where companies will hire you to work in English.
Yes. B2 is the sweet spot of functional independence. At B1 and B2, you are transitioning from declarative memory to procedural memory.
Procedural memory.
All right. You don't have to actively think about the rules to form a past tense verb anymore. Your brain just does it, much like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. The training wheels come off.
That sounds like a huge relief.
It really is. You can hold your own in a business meeting, you can watch a movie and actually follow the plot, and you can navigate daily life without constantly relying on a dictionary on your phone.
I have to play devil's advocate here then.
Go for it.
If B2 allows you to work a job, watch Netflix, and live comfortably in an English-speaking country, why bother going any further? Why does our 10-word prompt specifically demand we look at the journey all the way to C2? Doesn't the return on investment drastically drop off after B2?
That is the critical question, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's why the prompt's inclusion of to C2 is so vital. You are right that B2 provides the illusion of complete fluency, and for many people, honestly, it is entirely sufficient.
Right.
But B2 still has borders. At B2, you can understand the words in a joke, but you might completely miss the cultural punchline. You can write a professional email, but you might struggle to detect subtle passive aggressiveness from your boss. You are still, fundamentally, a guest in the language.
You're visiting the house, but you don't own the deed.
Exactly. The jump from B2 to C1 and ultimately to C2 requires a complete cognitive restructuring. At C2, you are no longer translating, even subconsciously. The language has become transparent.
Transparent? What do you mean?
You aren't looking at the language to decode it anymore. You are looking through it to see the world.
Okay, give me a tangible example of what that looks like in the brain. How is a C2 speaker processing information differently than a B2 speaker?
Think about idiomatic language. If an English speaker says, "He threw me under the bus," a B2 speaker understands the individual words, knows it's an idiom, and quickly recalls that it means being betrayed.
Right, there's that extra step.
Yes. A C2 speaker hears it and instantly feels the emotional weight of betrayal without any intermediate translation step. But even more than that, a C2 speaker can start breaking the rules.
Wait, breaking the rules?
True mastery of a system allows you to manipulate it. A C2 speaker understands the rules of grammar so implicitly that they know exactly when and how to bend them for comedic effect, or for poetic resonance, or to convey sarcasm.
Oh, that makes sense.
They can code switch depending on the social context. It is the difference between knowing how to play the sheet music perfectly and being able to improvise a jazz solo on the spot.
That brings us back to the video game analogy from earlier. A1 is learning to jump. B2 is being able to beat the game on normal difficulty. But C2 is having access to the developer source code. You can mod the game, you can change the physics, you own the environment.
That's a fantastic way to visualize it. And getting to that source code level requires an immense amount of neuroplasticity. The sheer volume of reading, listening, and cultural absorption required to reach C2 literally thickens the cerebral cortex.
Literally physically changes the brain.
It does. It builds robust neural networks that connect linguistic centers to emotional and memory centers in ways that lower-level fluency simply doesn't achieve.
Okay, so this perfectly tees up the core promise of the prompt. We've established the mechanics of the path. We've established the neurological difference between surviving at A1 and thriving at C2. Now we really have to talk about the typo. The text promises a singular outcome, the advantage, spelled with an E.
A delightful bit of irony for a prompt about English mastery.
Truly. But let's look past the spelling and focus on the concept. The author didn't say the benefits, plural. They didn't list out you get a better salary or you can travel easily.
Right.
They pointed to a singular overarching concept, the advantage. So what does this all mean? Based on everything we just discussed about cognitive restructuring the source code of language, what is that singular advantage?
This raises an important question, doesn't it? If we view this through a neurolinguistic lens, the ultimate advantage isn't just utility. The advantage is structural. When you push your brain to achieve C2 in a foreign language, you're essentially installing a second, highly sophisticated operating system alongside your native one.
Okay.
And because language dictates how we categorize the world, gaining a C2 operating system in English fundamentally expands your cognitive toolkit.
Wait, unpack that a bit. Language dictates how we categorize the world. Are you talking about how different languages force you to think about time or gender differently?
Partially, yes. But more broadly, English is a massive, highly synthesized language. It has absorbed vocabulary from Latin, French, Germanic roots, and it constantly generates new technical jargon. Achieving C2 in English specifically means you gain frictionless access to an overwhelming majority of the world's scientific research, global financial data, and technological development.
Because you aren't waiting for the translated summary. You are reading the raw data in real time.
Exactly. But it goes deeper than just access. The cognitive advantage of surviving the A1 to C2 path is the mastery of the learning process itself. To reach C2, you have to develop extreme frustration tolerance. You have to learn how to identify your own blind spots. You have to learn how to absorb cultural nuance without being defensive.
Oh, it's a meta skill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The advantage is the person you have to become to reach the end of the path. If you can conquer the A1 to C2 mountain, if you can push through the exhaustion of the emulator phase, past the deceptive comfort of the B2 plateau, and into the source code manipulation of C2, you possess a blueprint for mastering literally anything else in your life.
That is incredible. And honestly, it makes me look at that 10-word misspelled prompt with a lot more respect. Because it really is the ultimate distillation of a massive cognitive undertaking.
It strips away all the marketing noise of, learn a language in 30 days. It presents the raw coordinates, A1 to C2, the absolute genesis to the absolute zenith.
And it forces you to ask yourself, are you just casually wandering in the woods, or are you actually walking a path? Because, as we've discussed today, the mechanisms of learning completely change depending on your answer to that question. If you treat learning like a casual hobby, your brain will file the information in short-term storage and dump it when things get hard.
It really will.
But if you embrace the structure of the path, if you accept that the A1 cognitive overload is just the engine revving up and the B2 plateau is just the transition to procedural memory, you completely change your trajectory.
And tying this back directly to you, the listener, you don't have to be learning English for this framework to be incredibly useful. Think about whatever you are trying to master right now. Maybe it's a new programming language. Maybe it's a musical instrument. Maybe it's a really complex leadership role at your company.
Apply the CEFR scale to it.
Yes. Acknowledge where you are. If you are at A1 in your new role, give yourself permission to be exhausted. Your brain is running the emulator. It is manually processing every new piece of information. That isn't failure. That is the biological necessity of the declarative memory phase.
Right. Don't expect to be improvising jazz solos when you are still learning where middle C is.
Precisely. And if you feel stuck at B2, where you are competent but not extraordinary now that there, recognize that reaching C2 requires an entirely different kind of effort. You can't just memorize more flashcards to get to C2. You have to immerse yourself. You have to start looking at the structural logic of the system rather than just the surface level rules. That is how you gain the ultimate advantage, the advantage of structural mastery.
So we've taken a highly concentrated, somewhat clumsy 10-word sentence, and we've unpacked a complete, scientifically backed philosophy of learning. We explored the necessary friction of the A1 to A2 stages, the transition from declarative to procedural memory, and the ultimate cognitive upgrade that happens when you reach the C2 source code level. We really found the profound truth hiding inside a very brief prompt today.
It serves as a great reminder that sometimes clarity comes from stripping away the noise and just defining the start and end points.
It does. It gives you the map. But, we've spent this entire deep dive talking about the journey to C2. We've treated C2 as the ultimate finish line, the top of the mountain. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. A question that pushes past the boundaries of the text you sent us.
What happens when the map runs out?
Exactly. The A1 to C2 scale is brilliant because it gives us a quantifiable framework. It gives us waypoints. But the CEFR scale fundamentally measures your ability to conform to the established rules of a language. C2 proves you have mastered the system. But what happens after C2? Once you reach the absolute defined end of the mastery path, does the learning actually stop? Or does reaching C2 simply mean you've finally built the ship and the truly unmapped, boundless journey of creating something entirely new with that language is just about to begin?